Well, the tragic story of Lily Burke tugged at the hearts of all of us in Southern California. The suspect, Charlie Samuel, had been arrested 12 hours earlier on drug charges and released. He was also arrested in April on a parole violation and released June 24th after undergoing treatment for drug use. We're joined by our contributor, RonKaye of RonKaye072909. Ron, Charlie Samuel has proven to be a menace to society. How in the world did he keep walking around on the streets?
Well, there's going to be 27,000 more just like him, or at least some of them will be, Fred. The problem is that we really don't have a justice system. We plea bargain these guys so that they're listed as nonviolent offenders when, in fact, you know, he was a guy who shot, kidnapped. I mean, robbing in the middle of the night in an occupied building is one of the most serious crimes you can commit, and yet his record seems to be petty theft and relatively minor, and he might well qualify for being a nonviolent offender. So, you know, we got that problem, and the other side of the problem is, what do we do about these guys in prison? Do we actually offer them psychological, medical, or any other kind of help? Or do we put them into a hellhole where terrible things go on, and they're mixing it up with hardened criminals, and they come back out and they're on the streets where there's no jobs, no skills, no life? I mean, we're living in an uncivilized society.
I'm wondering what the percentage of cons who are rehabilitated are. I mean, the percentage cannot be high, I wouldn't think.
Well, they quote the 70% recidivist rate, that once you fall into that trap, you know, there's hardly any way out. One of the people who commented on my blog is a woman whose son messed up and got into a lot of trouble, and he went to prison. And what she wrote was that in visiting her son, in writing and talking to him over and over, it really came down to the only ones who had a chance are those who have family or close friends who will look after him, will support him, will give him hope through those dark days when they're in prison. So we're really engaging a breakdown in our social fabric, in our families, and in our hope. And we don't have our arms around this as a problem at all.
All right. I want to move on to something else you wrote about, and I find it fascinating. With the economy the way it is, you talk about the pension fund for police and firemen. Now, there are 286 people that make at least $100,000 a year. Bernie Parks tops the list at about $265,000 a year. You think this is crazy, right?
Well, I think it's insane. I mean, we've got 600 people, not counting the DWP, which hasn't turned over their list yet, who are in this exclusive city $100,000 a year pension club. And in the next couple of years, it's going to double and even triple, at the same time that it's going to cost us, the taxpayers, $1 billion next year and $2.5 billion in 3 years or 4 years to just keep their funds solvent with all the money they've lost. And we're giving 75 to 90% pensions. And the city's solution to its budget crisis is to give sweetened pension deals to 2,400 workers that add 12.5% to their pensions. So if you were, 53 years old, you'll be able to retire if you started in the city at 20, and you'll get 75% of your last pay.
Yeah, but Ron, let me ask you a question. That's the deal when they sign on. I mean, if you had a deal for a pension at a certain amount of money, would you want someone all of a sudden to say, now, wait a minute, Ron, we're not going to do this anymore? This was the deal when you signed on, and no one's doing anything illegal here, are they?
Well, it wasn't necessarily the deal when they signed on. These pensions have been enhanced in recent years dramatically. The union's job is to represent their members, but what they've done is to get such tremendous political power that there isn't a city official who doesn't own its election to the public employees unions. And so they get repaid for doing this service to the politicians, and the politicians look after them. The problem is we can't afford it anymore. It's not just L.A., it's the whole state. There's an unfunded pension liability to public employees of hundreds of billions of dollars. It's more expensive to pay them off in their pensions than to rebuild the whole state. Its water system, its road system. I mean, this is the biggest problem facing the state of California, the cities and counties.
Well, what's the solution?
Well, the solution is that we're headed off a cliff where the city of Los Angeles is going to be bankrupt, where the state is going to be eliminating basic services, and it's going to come to a head. And if there was any sanity to this, we'd all sit down at the table and we'd start figuring out, how do we cut this back? How do we reach a level of pay that we can afford? I mean, there's 10,000 city workers who are making over $100,000. That's almost 10% of the workforce. That's a lot of money. I don't know about most businesses, but that seems like a lot of money to the business I was in.
Yeah, but I really, and I mean this, I think it's very difficult after people are paid at a certain rate and they're promised a pension at a certain percentage of their income, just to say, you know what, we're changing the whole deal now, and I'm sorry, and you're out. And the city is buying people out to get them off the books, so that's where that increased amount of money comes from. I don't know. I just think it's tough to tell somebody, you've been promised this, now we're going to take it from you.
Well, we did it to the General Motors workers. They were promised unbelievable pensions, and as part of the bankruptcy, their pensions are capped at $55,000. And these Cadillac health plans that they're guaranteed, just like the city workers, have been scaled back. I mean, there's a certain point at which reality intrudes, and you sit down at the table and you find out what's the right number, what's the right level. And the people who ought to be concerned are the people who are still on the payroll, because they're going to pay sooner or later much increased costs of these pensions and facing sharply reduced salaries. And so sooner or later we have to act, sanely and figure out what the numbers are and do the right thing.
Ron, I appreciate you coming on tonight. Good insight as always. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you next week.
It's a pleasure. Thanks a lot.